Okay, hello, welcome. So this talk is on selling for security professionals. So what is this about? First of all, a little bit about me. My name is Stephanie Losi. I spent the prior 7 years as a bank examiner and senior bank examiner at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, looking at IT risk at a lot of big financial firms. Things like cybersecurity, business resilience, but also high-speed trading controls, risk data aggregation, change management, a lot of IT risk topics. And one of the things I noticed is that there's this key component, even in auditing work, but also in consulting work or as an information security manager, that a lot of people don't use. And it's selling, it's sales. It's actually a key component of the job. And you can get much better outcomes by using it. But there's a problem. So we'll talk about what that problem is, and it's a language problem. And there's these two worlds, security and business. So we'll talk about how can security professionals sell successfully, right? We'll look at some sample proposals that take a risk focus versus a business focus. We'll talk about questions you can ask yourself before a pitch. And really this can apply to an internal security manager as well as to an external consultant, right? And then we'll take a little bit of a different spin and we'll talk about selling for auditors, which also can apply to a third-party auditor, like a pen tester, as well as to an internal auditor, although they have a little bit of different set of constraints. And then we'll talk about questions and follow-up. So, what is the problem? Well, the problem is that security professionals tend to focus on risk, right? We're always thinking about worst case scenarios, redundancy and diversity of controls, risk reduction, right? Business executives spend most of their time focusing on growth. They think about return on investment, ROI, decision modeling, profit and loss, and growing their business, increasing revenue, right? They don't spend a lot of their time thinking about, oh, do I have sufficient redundancy and diversity of controls right now? No, they're thinking about, I want to launch this new business. Are my people spending their time signing new business and serving customers? So the situation that you end up with is the business line over here thinking like, okay, growth, ROI, profit, and then you have the security people over here thinking, oh my God, controls, threats, risk. And you have this pretty small common ground where they both want to protect the business reputation. It's a great goal, but it's not enough of a base to really build anything except this uncomfortable, slightly adversarial relationship where security is viewed as a cost center and the business is thinking, why do I have to do this when I could make an investment in something that produces a lot of revenue? But there's a better story here, which is that the reality is there's a much more optimistic view. The potential common ground is actually pretty big, and it focuses on things like maximizing the business's reputation, not just maintaining it, making the business resilient to inevitable errors and incidents, and helping the business lines grow, right? I mean, why do we have security? Why do we have risk management? So how do we bridge that gap? Because the business executive is unlikely to say, well, it's time for me to study security. It's time for me to really understand redundancy and diversity of controls and worst case scenarios. I want to spend my time in this. It's kind of on us as the security professional to think about business and understand how we can come to them and say, okay, here's how we can help your business grow. Here's how we can maximize the business reputation instead of just protecting, maintaining, status quo. So there's a significant language gap. The language of business is not the language of risk management. So as a result, business may view risk management as just requiring controls for the sake of controls. Why do we keep talking about this? Why do we keep thinking negatively and bringing this up? It can be difficult to quantify the benefits, right? What are they really going to gain from this? And as a result, it can really be difficult to justify investment in security measures versus a clear revenue-producing investment, which they also are considering at all times, whether you know it or not. So you're competing against all of these other potential proposals. Exceptions to this are businesses for which security breaches really could be catastrophic and they know it. Things like energy grids, they're used to thinking about the worst case scenario and protecting against that. Or a financial firm for which security measures are mandated by law or regulation. They know they have to think about it, but still you're competing with other things in their head. And even knowing that you have to do something doesn't mean you're excited about it. But it does mean you can change the story as the security professional, right? Because the reality is, despite these different languages, business and risk management teams have similar goals. Risk management exists to serve the business and allow it to grow, right? That's the only reason risk management is there. It's the only reason security exists. Risk management exists to serve the business and allow it to grow. And that's a message that we need to sell to the business, because that's probably not how they think about security when they first sit down with you. So as security and risk professionals seeking investment from business executives, because that's what we're doing. We're seeking investment. Selling is a key component of our job. And partnership, not just authority, is vital. I mean, it's very tempting to say, I've studied this for a long time, I know why you should do it. You must implement this control. Like I have the authority, and I feel like I'm bringing that authority to you, and it's sort of a gift, and I think I'm telling you that this is what you need to do. Well, the business person is thinking, I'm in charge of this business. I'm in charge of this business line. And here's this person taking this authority position and telling me, I need to do this. And it sets up sort of an adversarial relationship. But the reality is, security exists to serve the business, and this is a partnership. And if we approach it like a partnership, the result can be a heck of a lot better. Even if an investment is required by law or regulation, selling is beneficial. Why? It helps the business executive understand why that investment is required, and if applicable, why it might be worthwhile even without a requirement, right? It's unfortunate sometimes that's not applicable. Sometimes it's really not worthwhile, and there's just a requirement, they have to do it. But in a lot of cases, there is a case that can be made for the investment even if it weren't required. It brings the business executive into the process of deciding which solution offers the best ROI. And it helps both the business executive and the risk people to consider, how could this investment create a competitive advantage? Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes there is an opportunity to be found there. And always, one team united behind an investment is so much better than two parties grudgingly reaching an agreement to do something. So how do I sell? The details of how an exploit works, or the details of a technical specification, those are not business drivers or investment justifications, right? It's something that maybe we find extremely interesting, right? And want to share with the business executive, but that is not what's going to get the investment done. When you propose an investment, executives need to know a few things. They need to know, what do I need to do? Why is it important? Especially, why is it important? And what is the best solution from an ROI perspective? And how much will that solution cost? I guarantee that they might be thinking this fourth thing here. Could a workaround or manual process accomplish the goal, right? And in our head as a security professional, we're thinking, well, no, a manual process is not that good. It doesn't give you 100% protection. Maybe they're thinking, well, maybe I don't need 100% protection. Maybe I need the solution that is going to maximize my ROI. And maybe that's that solution. So it's more a process of understanding that question may be there, whether it's asked or not, and kind of having in our head, the rationale for why we think there's a better solution, if we think there's a better solution, or maybe being open to accept that, hey, a workaround or a manual process could accomplish the goal. So it gets back to focusing on the context and not just the content of our proposal. The business person is thinking a lot of different things when they're looking at a proposal, and it includes things like the size of the business, the state of the business cycle. Is it a recession right now? Is the economy booming? And other expenses that are facing the company right now. Is the company in major litigation right now? Has the company just announced a terrific quarter? Or is the company about to have a terrific quarter? Are they in the middle of really doing very well? That's going to really control the person's response. The business person's response is controlled by all of these things that have nothing to do with the actual content of your proposal or the thing that you're suggesting. So language is so key. When communicating your points, use business language. We have to come to them, because the likelihood that they're going to come to us on the risk language footing is really low. So let's think about talking about return on investment, decision modeling, profit and loss, growth strategy, and duty of care, right? I mean, these are things that are all going to resonate with the business executive. They learn these things in business school. They apply them in real life every day. And these are the things that they really care about, and that's how they serve their shareholders if it's a public company, or their employees if it's a private company. So, or in all cases, hopefully. But the core message is information security can be a long-term positive investment opportunity, right? So how do we frame an information security investment in these terms? Now let's take a look at some sample proposals, right? Here's a risk-focused proposal that someone might hypothetically dream up. They might say, well, this intrusion prevention system, it's the most advanced offering on the market. It analyzes network traffic using anomaly-based detection, so it can attempt to detect and prevent even zero-day attacks. We could significantly decrease our chances of a network compromise. Well, the business person is sitting there saying, well, what does that really mean for me to decrease my chances of a network compromise? As opposed to these other revenue generating proposals that are sitting in my head where I can see, hey, I could start a new business line. I could open a new desk, or I could invest in this intrusion prevention system, which uses something called anomaly-based detection to prevent something called the zero-day attack. If we present it as a business-focused perspective, we could say something like this. This intrusion prevention system would have been our only chance to prevent an attack like the recent incident we experienced. And it doesn't rely on known information, so it can attempt to detect and prevent even previously unknown attacks. If we avoid even one incident, we'll have saved $5 million and protected one of our most valuable assets, which is our reputation. And then with the time we save in avoiding an incident, we can focus on what we do best, signing new business and serving customers. That's a lot more likely to reach the business manager as a pitch, because they're thinking, well, yeah, I want to spend all my time signing new business and serving customers. They don't really want to be thinking about the details of this security stuff. That's our job as the security professional. So kind of going there with what could we save? We could save time, we could save money. How can we get our focus back on growth? Here's another proposal. This access management system will help us address the auditor's findings and meet the requirements of new regulations. It works with all of our major platforms, and we can build in functionality to extend it to the rest. It will allow us to keep track of employee entitlements, et cetera, on and on. Here's what it does for us. But it doesn't tell us why that's good. How does it get the business back to being effective in its core business? The business-focused perspective says, hey, this access management system will help us address these auditor findings and new regulations, absolutely, but it also will save time on our annual entitlement review process. And whose time will it save? It will save the time of business managers who should already be doing something else, right? In the business executive's head, their business manager spending time on the annual entitlement review process is time they are not spending building new systems or algorithms, or like managing the actual business, calling customers, doing revenue generating work. So this proposal says we estimate business managers will spend 50% less time manually reviewing their subordinates' entitlements. Right? Business executive is going to hear that and say, yeah, maybe this is an investment I want to make, despite an upfront cost. Because the business managers are going to get back to what they do best, and hey, I can minimize the risk of insider incidents, and that's something I'd like to do. So it's a much more effective proposal to think about what the business wants and try to build that into our proposal. So questions to ask yourself before a pitch. How does what I'm proposing help the business grow? And the answer may be indirect. It's probably going to be indirect. Examples are, this will make the business more resilient by reducing errors. But how much do those cost to fix, right? Say that. And bring up that the errors could have potential for legal liability. So the person can see, well, why do I want to reduce those errors in the first place, right? Fewer incidents will make us faster to market and first among our competitors. It's a good argument. Think about how your proposal will probably be weighed against other competing proposals that may help increase revenue directly. You probably don't know what those proposals are, but they're there. There's always a trade-off and a cost-benefit analysis going on in someone's head. Make sure that your proposal falls on the right side of the cost-benefit analysis. Does my proposal offer significant benefit in maximizing and not just protecting the business's reputation or helping the business grow? And am I focusing on maintenance, which is not a strong selling proposition? Maintenance is like, keep the lights on, let's minimize the amount of this type of investment that we do, let's focus on growth. So am I focusing on growth, which is a strong base for partnership with the business, right? Maintenance loses out to growth a lot of the time. So can you get your proposal into the growth bucket? All right, so one thing I want to talk about before I move on to this, I'm going to go back 1 second, is another thing called, so there are sales tactics you can use in doing this, right? There's something called AIDA, which means attention, interest, desire, and action, right? Have I got the attention of the business with my proposal? Have I got them interested? And do they want to know more? Do they have the desire to do what I'm asking them to do? And then action. Have I given them an opportunity to take action? Have I told them what the next step will be? Right? So all of the first three, attention, interest, and desire, they come down to this one question that the business person is going to have, which is, what's in it for me? right? So what's in it for the business executives? I mean, if you can answer that core question, you've just increased your likelihood of getting approval for whatever you're asking for, by a lot. And you've increased the likelihood that they will take action. Well, how do you communicate that what's in it for me? Well, you use their language, right? You don't use the language of risk. You don't use our language, controls, and locking things down. What's the worst thing that could happen? This will help us, mitigate the risk of that. Now, we use their language. We say, how can this maximize the business? How can this help the business grow? How can this help the executives and the management focus on generating more revenue? Okay. Also, and this is the common sense things that you would hear, but in the meeting with business management, eye contact, right? Act as if you have nothing else on your mind and nowhere else to be. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're an external consultant and you've been in 5 different firms that day, in 5 different meetings talking about 5 different things and you don't even know where you are. They don't know that. And for this hour, you are with them. And you're telling them how you can help their business grow. And you're making an ask for an investment. So just to be present there, be polite, respectful, friendly, obviously, not really kind of to move away from you must right now immediately to let's talk about why this is a risk. Let's talk about how this can help the business. Be honest if you don't know something. If they ask something and you don't know, best response is, I don't know, but we can find out, right? And then follow up, right? Even in sales, a lot of salespeople never follow up. Like they make a call, they talk to the customer, they move on, right? So the likelihood that someone will agree in a sales conversation the first time is actually sort of low. The longer that conversation continues via follow-up, via additional interaction, the greater the likelihood that they'll eventually say yes, right? Assuming that you're managing the conversation, you're using their language, you're creating AIDA, right? Attention, interest, desire, action. If you can maintain that conversation and maintain a partnership, right? As opposed to coming down as an authority and demanding things from them, the likelihood that they'll say yes goes up and up and up. So follow up and create the expectation and the opportunity for follow up, right? So they don't feel like constantly, pinged by you from out of the blue sky. Just sort of say, hey, thank you for the meeting. We'll follow up in a couple of weeks. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll do the same with you, and really make it a conversation. So that's sort of some sales tactics for all of this. Whether you're an internal information security manager or an external consultant trying to make recommendations to a firm. So now we'll talk about selling for auditors, which is a critical differentiator for auditors, even though the role is a little weird. It's a little different because auditors, they may not know they're selling, for one thing. They're in this position where, they've been given authority over what the business is supposed to do. And the business, if it's an internal auditor or a regulator, management may be required to address your findings. They may have to do what you say. So it's easy to take this viewpoint, hey, I've already won. All I have to do is say what they need to do, and then I can just move on, and it'll happen. They'll do it. The ask for investment is also indirect, because information security managers are going to be the ones who actually make the ask to business executives in response to your findings. You may be presenting to the information security manager, and then they may need to present to the business executive, depending on the situation. So whether you're a pen tester, or a third-party audit firm, or an internal auditor, there's a lot of different things as opposed to just kind of being a manager asking for investment in your firm. Even if management is required to address your findings, if you're an internal auditor, your sales ability is still going to determine how valuable your input is for the business as a whole and what the outcome is, right? Are your findings going to be addressed as a limited check-the-box workaround or a strategic business investment, right? Because usually an auditor doesn't audit the whole firm. An auditor audits a piece of the firm, right? A business unit, a desk, a particular risk stripe. And you see a limited set of things, right? But the best case scenario is for someone to say, wow, I've had this great conversation, I understand what the risk is. I think I'm going to take a look myself and be proactive about this and maybe apply this across the entire firm or across the whole world, all of the offices around the globe. You couldn't have gotten that done by mandating it because you can't audit the entire firm. Auditing means you sampled some stuff, right? So think about when you make a pitch as an auditor, did you explain what the risk is, why it's important, and if applicable, how can the business benefit from addressing that using business language? Did you sell the finding even if you didn't have to? One possible outcome if you sell your finding well is the business proactively, like we said, extends your finding from one business unit across the enterprise. That's something you could not have mandated if you only audited one area. If you sell your finding poorly, you can kind of have an opposite outcome, and it's really counterproductive because it affects you in the future. If you're an internal auditor and you only work with this one firm, or you're an external consultant and you repeatedly come to this firm, right? If you're doing pen testing at a firm and you have multiple engagements, if you sell your findings poorly, what happens maybe the business does not volunteer extra information in future audits. Your job gets harder, you have less productive conversations, and the response to your findings becomes more tactical and more limited over time. That's sort of a worst case scenario. That's a risk right there. So adversarial relationships can lead to stonewalling and less than optimal outcomes. Whereas on the other hand, a respectful independent relationship can acknowledge the business goals while also emphasizing the importance of risk, which is internal audit's job, right? Internal audit is there to sort of be the risk voice, right? But that doesn't mean think only risk and don't understand where the business is coming from, right? It means understand where the business is coming from, but then emphasize the importance of risk and have that conversation. So maintaining a productive yet independent relationship between auditors and business leaders is a delicate balance, but it has great potential benefits because it gets you to that really big potential common ground. Right? This is where we want to get. There's always going to be different interests, and that's good. But the bigger this is, the bigger the common ground, the more effective you are going to be as a security professional, whether you're an information security manager inside a company or an internal auditor inside a company or an external consultant with a consulting firm kind of making some independent recommendations or a pen tester, it doesn't matter. Your job is to sell what you're suggesting in such a way that the business can understand it in their language and to use sales tools to get that done. So the key is sales, right? It's the missing piece between kind of just doing your job and really being effective with the business. Because the business operates in a different world, and sales allows you to say, I'm going to come to your world. I'm not going to stay in my world and kind of shout across a gap at you from my world. I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to use your language to explain to you my world in a way that you don't have to think too hard about it, and you can understand why we want to do this, and we're going to be partners in making sure that what needs to get done gets done. So, thank you for listening to this, and if you have questions, I'm happy to take them, but first, I hope I have sold you on the importance of selling to business managers as a security professional, right? I hope I got your attention, interest, desire, and action, and I would encourage you to follow up. If you want to take action, follow up on this, read up on AIDA. You can just Google it. There is a Wikipedia article about it. It'll point you to a lot of other resources about this. If you want to learn about sales and you don't want to make it your life calling, but you know it's important, there's a book called The Best Damn Sales Book Ever by Warren Grecius. And it can kind of just give you some quick tips to help yourself do this. And then there's another resource if you want to understand the business language more without getting an MBA. This book is called The Personal MBA, Master the Art of Business by Josh Kaufman. And by reading that, you'll get a sense of some of these terms that business executives have learned in school, and start thinking as you read that about, well, okay, how can I use this information to talk more effectively to them, to bring my world to them in a way that's easy for them to understand and agree with. And that's that. So thank you. Okay. Questions? Anyone? Yeah. Can we get my slides? Absolutely. Yeah. So are they available through a website, or you can just email me if not?
Yeah, they'll be on the video, but by all means, contact.
Okay. Yeah. Just stop by, and I'll just email them to you. How about that? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes what I see happen is there's a disconnect in value, where I'll be explaining to someone, a security professional, sometimes a disconnect in value. I'll just be loud. Yeah.
I can hear you.
Sometimes a disconnect in value where I'm explaining to someone, this is really important and you're going to get breached. But the response is, we've been breached before and we survived. Why do I need to care?
Right. Absolutely.
My admins were going to do that, and they're getting paid anyway, so I'm not going to take any action.
Right. Okay. So the question is, sometimes there's a response that I've been breached before and I'm still here. Right. It wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't go out of business. Why should I do this? I'm not going to do it. And I think then it gets down to kind of reframing it, right? So if that pitch is not working, is there a way to say, what will they prevent, right? Are there current events you can point to that they could avoid with this? So could they avoid something like the Sony hack, which did a lot of damage to the firm? Maybe appeal to protecting the business's reputation or protecting the executive's reputation, which kind of that's more of something that they may care about. But also kind of pointing at, is there a way that investing in this could get their business managers doing something else rather than, so if there was a prior incident, did the business itself, not the security people, but did the business have to scramble around it all or do things that took them away from their primary task? And maybe try to frame it in that way. So, to say, well, this will save time on the business side, on the revenue side, so they can focus on revenue. Because I think if they can just say, yeah, the admin always deals with it, maybe that's a point. Maybe there's a manual workaround or a manual process that they should consider instead, right? So if it really isn't delivering ROI to them, then maybe they're right. Maybe it doesn't, but there's probably a way that it could deliver ROI if you think of if you pitch it in the right way. If you think about whose time could it save? Yeah.
So, first thing, great presentation. Another thing I want to say, so you're selling security product, so it's like selling insurance. I mean, basically we're in the business of insurance. Now you said there's a disconnect between security professionals and business professionals, but most of the time the person in charge of managing risk is the CFO. That's right. So the CFO has to talk the risk language. I mean, he does care about reducing exposure. That's right. So he can either buy insurance, or for the reason that he cannot insure, he has to buy product. That's right. My only thing is that you have to quantify that. Either you quantify the risk of the organization and then reducing that risk, but the quantification is really hard. And also, if you can, have you seen any models for ROI for security products? I mean, I've looked and tried to calculate ROI. It's very hard because you're calculating but for like the 5 million loss that you had in your example that didn't happen. So, have you seen any models out there that really try to model and get either value at risk measure or return on investment ROI or anything like that?
Okay. So the question is about ROI and what's a good way to calculate it, because it's very difficult. There don't seem to be a lot of good models for doing that. I agree with you. It's a really hard problem because a lot of security is unquantifiable. It's saying we had nothing happen, and that's great. I did a podcast a while ago with CERT about the ROI of security, and so but it's mainly just about using a net present value equation and kind of coming up with a risk estimate. So the 5 million in this slide was basically meant to convey like that's what they lost in the last incident, right? If you have something you can point to where you could say like this happened in the past and it cost X, you could say, well, that's a decent baseline. Or you could say, well, okay, this happened to some other company and they lost, let's say they lost like $450 million, right? So you could say, well, that's like a decent proxy for a worst case scenario. But then you're looking at like chance of it happening, right? What's the likelihood? It's probably pretty low. So when you actually multiply out your ROI calculation, it may not work out for the business because they may say, well, I could have this catastrophic outcome, but the likelihood is pretty low, and so security is weird because it may look like you shouldn't make the investment, but if the worst case scenario happens, you're out of business. Maybe you should. So it's almost like there's a factor that I think that doesn't get included in most ROI equations, which is sort of like the disaster factor, right? So what is it like? It's sort of like, what is the expected loss? What's the likelihood of it happening? But what's the existence risk if it happens, right? It's almost like there's this other thing going on. Like if there is a risk to the existence of the business, how would you calculate that? And should it be an additional factor that you take into account? I don't know of a lot of good models for it.
My only question is if you're evaluating specific product or service, I mean, you're either inside or even from the outside, that's right.
Right.
Putting everything in context, that's the hard part.
I agree. So especially the CFO, I think, probably doesn't know IT risk that well either, which I think it's another challenge. If there's a chief risk officer, that's probably a better bet. They may report to the CFO, or they may report to someone else in the organization. But the CFO, I think, tends to focus a lot on financial risk. So it's hard to distill security down to that.
Buys insurance. I mean, even
Yeah.
the CFO, it's a medium company, he'll be buying the insurance, so it's best to focus on risk as well. I mean, in order to buy insurance, you get to know your risks.
Do you mean cyber risk insurance or any insurance? Okay.
Any risk, yes, right? I mean, companies who buy cyber
Right.
insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. All I could say to you is it's a tough problem. As far as I can tell, without an answer so far, in terms of how you calculate ROI, I would say look at past incidents. Look at, can you find a proxy for a worst case scenario? And then try to talk about gain and not loss, right? Just like, what could they gain from doing this, right? Because I think it's a better sell than trying to say, okay, we're going to lose like, this much less. But what will we also gain by doing it? Yeah.
Some of the pushback that we get when we try to sell security to a brand new team who hasn't paid attention to it is security is not sexy.
Right.
When I build features, I can put them on my feature list and I can monetize them, right? And the response to that I usually give, and that most of the time works well, is when you go to buy a car, you ask about how fast does it go from 0 to 60, does it have leather seats, Bluetooth, and whatnot. When do you ever ask the question whether it has logs? You don't.
Right.
Our customers expect security to be in the product. They never ask for it.
Right. They expect the car is not going to catch on fire in the middle of the road. Right.
Right. And that, I guess, coupled with instead of revenue generation, revenue erosion, that if something should happen, your next release out to the customers is going to be delayed by that much. They'll lose that many resources to focus on that particular issue.
Right.
I think all of that put together generates enough fear factor where they start to think about it seriously.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think beyond fear factor, you could say time saved. You could say, if someone's going to save 100 hours that they're not spending dealing with this problem, 100 hours of their time is worth X, so that's a gain. You can sort of point to that as sort of a concrete gain that goes into your ROI as well.
But there's also a cost to implement the security, right?
Absolutely.
And you got to balance the two.
Right. I mean, security is traditionally it's always viewed as a cost center. So I think anything we can do to move it off of that platform and just and try to talk more about the gains could help to balance that out. But you're right. It has costs, of course.
And think
Yeah.
that his point is, my product has been out there in the market for 10 years. I haven't had a single breach. Why should I bother? Why should I?
Sometimes you don't get the investment until after something happens.